All right, here's the latest update. I went to Carolina Motorsports Park this weekend, and on the back straightaway, I was passing a car. I was about 5,000 RPM, and all of a sudden the engine just shut off. So I took out, or when I got back, I tested the MSD box. Well, let me back up. When I put the key in, the engine would turn over, and and it didn't sound like anything was wrong with the engine when the starter was turning it over. So I tested the MSD box and was able to get a spark by disconnecting the distributor wire and putting a screwdriver in there and putting it close to ground, and then shorting the connections for the 12-volt power. Anyway, there's a procedure you use, and I got a spark. So next thing I did was popped out the distributor to have a look at it to see if maybe that wasn't working correctly, because I had fuel, I had ignition, but for some reason it wasn't starting the engine. So I pulled out the distributor and I found this distributor gear. Let's see if I can get this to focus. Okay, there we go. Look at that. All the teeth are ripped off this side of the distributor gear. There you go. There's a good shot. Looks like on this side they're good, but this side they just came right off. And I did a little research and talked to a buddy of mine that works at Competition Products, and he said that just sometimes happens. I looked online, and yeah, sure enough, lots of people talk about this. And with a Pontiac, the distributor really can't be put in there at the wrong height. That's a Chevy thing, because it goes into the block on a Pontiac, and the cam doesn't walk on a Pontiac. There's no cam button on a Pontiac. It's got the timing cover. So I looked at the so what I did, I put in a bronze gear. These are just some break-in gears that I had. This one's already been worn a little bit. Yeah, you can see the teeth on this one, but I had another one that hadn't been worn too much. So I put in a bronze gear. And then before, cranking the engine, I wanted to make sure that I could get out any debris from that distributor gear that was in the oil pan. So I drained the oil, and then I filtered it through a little mesh screen to see what I could find. And oh, I've already cleaned it up. Well, I found 2 or 3 little pieces of that distributor gear. So what I did next, I called the engine builder and said, hey, how do I, without removing the engine, how do I make sure that pan is clean with no debris? And he said, jack the car up from the passenger side, so it's in the front, and so the oil is coming back towards the back driver's side of the pan where the drain plug is on a Canton pan, and pour in a gallon of mineral spirits, and just where you fill in the oil, right there. So I poured in a gallon of mineral spirits and then pulled the drain plug, and that came gushing out. And sure enough, I found a couple of more particles. So the mineral spirits will break the oil loose in the oil pan, and any particles that are sticking in the oil pan will break loose and come out with the mineral spirits. That's a cool little trick. It worked. So now I'm going to I filled it back up with oil, put a new filter on. Also cut open the other filter just to make sure no engine material was in there and it was clean. So then I filled it up with some oil, and the builder said, drive about 10 miles, let it cool down, and then drive around a little bit more, about 10 miles, let it cool down, and then drain all that oil. Get that oil out of the system. And so sure enough, changing that distributor gear. Let me get my keys out. So let's go ahead and pre-oil with the AccuSump. All right, pre-oiling. And let's see. Sure enough, the distributor gear was the problem. You can see the timing light flashing. I had to reset the timing. So that's good. Engine is back in business. And let me see if I can get out of this car. A great way to get the timing almost right without even using a timing light before you even crank it is under the distributor cap. There's that rotor that spins, but it has the contact, or the little metal tab that spins around. Well, get the metal tab pointed at cylinder 1 and put the engine at top dead center on cylinder 1, and then put the cap on, and you can see this is cylinder 1, and you literally point it. Make sure this is lined up with that little contact. Underneath the cap, that contact is pointed right here. And then just turn it and point it where that contact is pointing, right to cylinder 1. And that will get you within 10 or so degrees, and the engine will crank up first try without having to mess around with the timing and whatnot. But now I've got it set to 32 degrees and she's back in business. And let's hope that after I drive 10 or so miles and then flush the oil pan again, any debris will come out of there. And that was by the way, it was a composite gear, which certain cam shafts can be used with different materials. For example, here's a steel gear. You don't use this type of gear on a solid roller cam. Well, I'm not sure if you can or not. Maybe you can. But the gear that I was using was a composite gear. So you don't want to mismatch. I think steel and iron, or steel and steel. There's some rule with the with what cam and then what type of material on your distributor gear. But a composite gear can be run on any cam. So if you ever don't know, just put one of these on. And a bronze gear, these are designed to sacrifice themselves because it's softer than the cam gear, and it will slowly over time, instead of eating your cam gear up, the distributor gear will, let's see if I can get a good, there we go. See, you can see how this is worn a little, because this was run for 1,000 or a couple of thousand miles. But in your oil filter, you'll see a bunch of little bronze slivers where this gear will sacrifice itself in order to save your cam gear. So I like to, I'm going to run these and change the bronze gear every few weekends, or every few race events. So anyway, thank God that engine wasn't blown.